Think food preservation is a modern invention. Think again. The ancient Romans had already mastered the art of keeping food fresh for months, even years. No fridges, no freezers, just pure ingenuity. So, how did they do it? Their shockingly effective methods might just change the way you think about food storage forever. These ancient foodies were notorious for their love of meat. The weirder, the better. But with all this lavish feasting came one big challenge: preservation. Salting was by far the most popular method, and for a good reason. By drawing out moisture, salt prevents bacterial growth, making it a game changer for food storage and trade. Salted meats were staples in Roman cuisine. But salt's significance went beyond the kitchen. In ancient Egypt, salt was used for mummification and even served as a form of currency. Smoking meats over low heat was another Roman favorite. This method dehydrated and preserved meats like sausages and bacon, which were then stored for later enjoyment. The Romans loved the slow and savory route, as it added a depth of flavor to their meats. Until today, this method is still very much used. But that's not all. The Romans also used a combination of salt, herbs, and spices to cure meats like ham and prosciutto. This process drew out moisture and added flavor, creating deliciously preserved meats. Curing was an art form in itself, as the Romans carefully balanced flavors to create mouth-watering delicacies. Pickling was another common method, where meats were soaked in a brine solution to create an acidic environment that inhibited bacterial growth. Pickled meats were incredibly popular in Roman cuisine, and the tangy flavor added a whole new dimension to their meals. For long-term storage, the Mediterranean sun provided the perfect conditions for drying meats. By removing moisture, they made their food lightweight, long-lasting, and easy to store. A protein-packed snack that could be enjoyed anytime, anywhere. And what about fruits and veggies? These were also a staple of the Mediterranean diet. The Romans grew and devoured a wide variety of fruits, from tangerines and oranges to grapes and figs. Even in poor soil, they managed to grow apples, pears, and plums, showing their skill in farming and love for fresh food. Apples were especially popular. The Romans learned how to graft apple trees, helping orchards spread all over the empire. By Cicero's time, Italy was covered with orchards, providing an abundance of fresh fruits for all to enjoy. The Romans were also masters of fruit preservation. They learned from the Greeks and Etruscans, improving upon their methods to create a wide range of preserved fruits and veggies. To preserve their fruits, the Romans employed a simple yet effective method: drying. They dried fruits like grapes, figs, and dates under the warm Mediterranean sun, removing moisture and preserving the fruit's natural sweetness. But here's where their methods became more creative, involving a sweet and sticky fruit syrup called defrutum. By boiling down fresh fruits, they created a thick, concentrated syrup that not only preserved produce, but also enhanced flavors in various dishes. Another popular method was pickling, where veggies like cucumbers, onions, and cabbage were soaked in a salty brine. This acidic environment prevented bacterial growth, ensuring that vegetables stayed crisp, tangy, and full of flavor for months. Whether it was sweet syrups or salty brines, the Romans knew exactly how to make their food last. The Romans also discovered the preservative properties of honey, using it to store fruits and veggies. They stored veggies like olives and peppers in oil, preventing moisture from entering the container. Finally, they built cool cellars and ice houses to store fruits and veggies at a lower temperature, slowing down the spoilage process. But whilst these Romans were busy preserving their solids, they also did the same for their liquids. Just like today, in ancient Rome, wine was the drink of choice, flowing like a river through everyday life. It was savoured with meals, sipped at parties, and even revered in poetry. Rome's greatest writers, like Ovid, extolled its virtues, highlighting its ability to spark conversation and banish worries. Ovid wrote, "There, when the wine is set, you will tell me many a tale, how your ship was all but engulfed, and how, while hastening home to me, you feared neither hours of unfriendly night nor headlong winds of the south." Wine gave Romans the courage to share their stories and forget their troubles. But how did they make this magical elixir? Without refrigeration or preservatives, grape juice quickly fermented into wine. Roman wine was notoriously sweet and potent, thanks to the use of late-season grapes, and, following the Greek custom, they diluted their wine with water, a practice considered civilized, as only barbarians would drink it straight. The water content varied depending on the occasion. At family meals, the ratio was around 3:1, water to wine. However, in taverns, the wine flowed stronger, with less water added. Ironically, the wine was often safer to drink than the water, thanks to its acidity and alcohol content, which curbed the growth of bacteria and pathogens. To mask any vinegary flavors, Romans added honey and water to their wine. The elite enjoyed finer, sweeter wines, while slaves made do with cheaper, more acidic varieties. Wine played a starring role in Roman life, bringing people together and fueling conversations, creativity, and camaraderie. Its legacy continues to inspire our love of wine today. However, preserving wine for extended periods was a significant challenge. Wine spoilage was a common issue due to factors like oxidation, contamination, and temperature fluctuations. The Romans needed a reliable method to preserve wine, ensuring its quality and longevity. To address this problem, the Romans employed several innovative techniques. They used clay amphorae, sealed with cork or resin, to store and transport wine. These containers protected the wine from light, oxygen, and contaminants. Wax seals were applied to the corks to prevent air from entering the amphorae, preserving the wine's flavor and aroma. The Romans also used resin and pitch, derived from pine trees, to seal the amphorae and prevent leakage. Wealthy Romans built cool, underground cellars to store their wine collections. These cellars maintained a consistent temperature, slowing down the aging process. It's a method still used today in wine caves and cellars. However, these cellars were not without their problems. Maintaining a consistent temperature was a challenge, and the cellars were prone to dampness and temperature fluctuations. This could cause the wine to spoil or become contaminated. The damp conditions also created an ideal environment for mold and mildew growth, damaging the wine and storage containers. Flooding posed another threat, as the underground cellars were vulnerable to water damage. Despite these challenges, the Romans continued to innovate. They developed a clever rack and fining process to clarify and refine their wines. This involved transferring the wine from one container to another, leaving sediment behind. The Romans' determination to preserve their wines led to the development of techniques that are still very much used today. You might think that these Romans didn't have a clue about keeping their food fresh by cooling. But think again. The ancient Romans were masters of keeping food cool and fresh, even without the luxury of modern fridges. But how? Before we dive into that, make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. So, the Romans developed a system to harvest, transport, and store ice and snow, keeping their food and drinks cool and fresh. Wealthy Romans would send their slaves to mountainous regions, such as the Alps, the Apennines, or the mountains of Greece, to collect snow and ice during the winter months. The snow and ice were packed in insulated containers or wrapped in straw to keep them cool during transport. But that's not all. The Romans also established trade networks with merchants who specialized in snow and ice transportation. These merchants would collect the precious cargo from the mountains and transport it to Rome, where it was stored in insulated containers and underground ice houses. The ice houses were essentially underground structures, designed to keep the snow and ice cool. They were built to maintain a consistent cool temperature, ensuring that the Romans could enjoy cool drinks and fresh food throughout the year. Another clever technique used instead of refrigeration was one of their clever techniques by utilizing underground cellars or basements, which provided natural cooling. These spaces were perfect for storing food, wine, and other perishable items. Many Roman homes had these underground spaces, which served as a natural fridge. The Romans also knew that direct sunlight could quickly spoil food. To combat this, they would often store food in shaded areas, such as under trees or in covered courtyards. This simple trick helped keep food cool and fresh. Another ingenious method the Romans employed was evaporative cooling. They would place food in clay vessels or containers and cover them with wet cloth. As the water evaporated, it cooled the food. This technique was pure genius. But perhaps the most accessible method of all was cooking and preparing food at night when the temperature was cooler. This clever technique minimized spoilage and kept food fresh for longer. These clever techniques prove that you don't necessarily need modern technology to keep food cool and fresh. Though the Romans' ancient refrigeration system might seem primitive compared to our modern fridges, it's a testament to their brilliance and creativity. It's clear that the Romans' love of food knew no bounds. Food was a celebration, a spectacle, and an ultimate symbol of power. The Romans were masters of culinary innovation, experimenting with exotic ingredients like chickpeas, sea urchins, and parrot tongues. Their dishes were a symphony of flavors, with honey, caraway, salt, and pepper adding depth and complexity. And let's not forget garum, the notorious fermented fish sauce that Romans couldn't get enough of. But Roman cuisine wasn't just about the food, it was an experience. Elite dinner parties, known as convivia, were lavish affairs that lasted for hours. Guests reclined on couches, indulging in delicacies like raw oysters, lobster, and wild boar. The masterpiece? Dishes like stuffed dormouse and parrot tongue stew, designed to impress and delight. Can you even imagine sitting down to a meal featuring a stuffed, meaty, and rather large rodent? Sounds unusual, right? But the Romans didn't mind. To them, this stuffed dormouse was a prized delicacy. But what exactly was this curious creature? The dormouse was essentially a larger, more robust ancestor of modern mice. And how did the Romans prepare it for the table? First, live dormice were pampered in a glirarium, a special ceramic jar filled with nuts to fatten them up. It was like a luxurious rodent resort. Once they were nice and plump, the dormice were cooked and stuffed with an intriguing mix of ingredients. According to the famous Roman cookbook, De Re Coquinaria by Apicius, the dormice were stuffed with a savory blend of pork, pepper, pine nuts, and fish sauce. One can only imagine the look of delight on the diners' faces as they savored this exotic dish. The Romans were known for their adventurous palates, and the stuffed dormouse was certainly a testament to their culinary creativity. Who knows? Maybe this ancient delicacy will inspire a new generation of foodies to experiment with unusual ingredients. However, this excess was reserved for the wealthy. Commoners, living in insulae, apartment buildings, had a more humble diet. Their daily meals consisted of millet or wheat-based porridge, seasoned with herbs and occasional meat. Despite the differences, food was a source of joy for all Romans, regardless of social status. So therefore, in Rome, food was a passion, and preserving it was an art. That takes us to the Romans' olives, a very popular food in Rome back then, and its preservation was extremely essential for Rome to thrive. So how did they do it? Well, olives were the ultimate Roman staple. The average Roman consumed a staggering 20 litres, over 5 gallons, of olive oil annually. This liquid gold was a major cash crop, with some families amassing fortunes from trading it. Olive oil was so valued that governments ensured a steady supply, and some emperors even gave it away for free as part of their bread and circuses policy. To preserve their precious olives, the Romans employed various clever techniques. They would sprinkle ripe olives with salt, leaving them untouched for 5 days, before drying them in the sun. This simple yet effective method allowed them to enjoy their olives throughout the year. The Romans also preserved olives using a sweet, salt-free method called boiled must. This technique involved submerging the olives in a sweet liquid, which helped to preserve their flavor and texture. Half-ripe olives were covered in high-quality oil, retaining their fresh flavor for over a year. This method was particularly effective, as the oil helped to seal in the flavors and aromas of the olives. For green olives, the Romans used a combination of strong brine and spices to preserve them. They would either preserve the olives whole in the brine or beat them into a spicy mass with vinegar and herbs. This created a delicious and tangy condiment that was perfect for accompanying their favorite dishes. The Romans even created a special preparation called epityrum, a delicious salad made from chopped olives, mixed with vinegar, coriander seeds, cumin, fennel, and mint, then covered in oil. This tasty treat was enjoyed with cheese, a perfect accompaniment to their favorite dishes. But that's not all. The Romans also used clay and mud to preserve food. They'd coat fruits and vegetables in a layer of clay to prevent moisture from entering and spoiling the food. This clever technique was even documented by the Roman agricultural writer Varro in his book Rerum Rusticarum Libri. Who knew that clay could be a key ingredient in food preservation? These unusual preservation methods might raise a few eyebrows, but they demonstrate the resourcefulness and creativity of the ancient Romans. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll rediscover the benefits of clay-wrapped veggies. But of the most unusual substances they took great care to preserve, it was blood. It might seem strange to modern sensibilities, but made perfect sense in their world. They didn't just spill it in gladiatorial arenas or on the steps of temples. They valued it, preserved it, and even consumed it. Blood, especially from livestock like cattle, sheep, and pigs, wasn't just waste from a slaughterhouse. It was an ingredient, a remedy, and, in some cases, a source of power. The Romans had clever ways of keeping it fresh, mixing it with salt, vinegar, or other substances to prevent spoilage. But why go through all this trouble? Because blood was a prized delicacy. The Roman elite believed it had medicinal properties, a potent essence of life itself. It found its way into rich, hearty dishes, sausages, stews, and even something resembling modern black pudding. Some even whispered that gladiators drank the blood of fallen foes, believing it could grant them strength or cure ailments like epilepsy. Beyond the dining table, blood played a sacred role. It was collected in rituals, poured out in sacrifices to appease the gods, and used in purification ceremonies. So you see, the ancient Romans were known for their love of fine food, lavish feasts, and their fine art of preserving these meals. Their feasts were spectacles of excess, where delicacies were more than just meals. They were displays of power, wealth, and sometimes sheer madness. Few embodied this obsession more than Marcus Gabius Apicius, a legendary gourmet who took his love of fine dining to an extreme. His banquets were so extravagant that one of them reportedly cost a jaw-dropping 60 to 100 million sesterces, roughly $15 million in today's money. But gluttony has its price. After squandering his fortune, Apicius found himself with a mere 10 million sesterces left. Horrified by the thought of living modestly, he did the only logical thing. He poisoned himself. But Apicius wasn't the only one with an insatiable appetite for the bizarre. The Roman elite took indulgence to an entirely different level. Their menus featured the exotic, the unusual, and the downright unsettling. Sure, they enjoyed staples like doves, chickens, figs, dates, almonds, and truffles. But they also craved dishes that would make modern diners recoil. Foie gras, fowl cooked in clay pots, and meats sourced from creatures better suited to a nature documentary than a dinner plate. Interestingly, some foods we now associate with Italian cuisine were entirely absent. No tomatoes, no potatoes, no spaghetti, no risotto, and certainly no corn. And despite their open embrace of culinary extravagance, Romans weren't always keen on foreign flavors. A satirical Roman character once mocked Greek cuisine, saying, "They give weeds to their guests as though they were cattle, and they flavor their weeds with other weeds." For the wealthiest Romans, no animal was off limits. They dined on nightingale tongues, camel heels, and even elephant trunks. Their menus read like a zoologist's worst nightmare. Peacocks, dolphin meatballs, herons, goat feet, peacock brains, boiled parrots, flamingo tongues, and orioles. They even ate electric fish, not for its taste, but because they found it fascinating. To them, it was quite literally a shockingly good meal. And just when you think it couldn't get any more absurd, the Romans took their love for theatrical feasting to new heights. They didn't just serve animals, they stacked them, one inside another, like some culinary matryoshka doll. Imagine a calf stuffed with a pig, which held a lamb, which contained a chicken, which hid a rabbit, which finally encased a mouse. A single dish packed with an entire food chain. But nothing topped Emperor Elagabalus's outrageous cravings. He once ordered 600 ostriches slaughtered just so he could enjoy ostrich brain pie. If that's not over the top, what is? Despite their culinary snobbery, the Romans were definitely masters of food preservation. The techniques they developed are still used today, with many modern methods building upon their discoveries. From salting and smoking to pickling and drying, the Romans were experts in keeping their food fresh and flavorful. Their love of fine food drove them to innovate and experiment with various preservation methods. The Romans' passion for the good things in life led them to search for ways to keep their culinary delights fresh and enjoyable. And so, their legacy as masters of food preservation lives on, inspiring foodies and chefs around the world.